All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to another MedTech webinar. Today, I am pleased to bring you the topic of balanced innovation. We're going to be talking about navigating legacy technology, obsolescence, and innovating in MedTech. We have an awesome panel, and today's webinar is brought to you by our friends at MedAcuity. Before I turn it over to our panel, I do have a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded today, so anyone who registered for the webinar will receive a copy after. And also, we are going to be taking questions throughout the webinar. So please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer all of those questions. All right, without further ado, I am pleased to turn it over to our moderator for today, Don Hawthorne. Don is the CEO and president of GTW Hawthorne, and he's going to be leading our conversation today. Don.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much. And welcome everyone to the webinar today. We're very fortunate to have three excellent panelists, Eftal Ifiri, Juan Eslava, and Jay McGaffigan. Let's begin by having each of them share a bit about their backgrounds and experience. Eftal?
Yep, I can go first. Thank you, Don. Hello, everyone. My name is Eftal Ifiri, and I am the Director of Agile Delivery for Medical Devices at Insulet. I developed my career in the medical device industry, working on implantable pacemakers and defibrillators, percutaneous heart pumps, as well as intravascular diagnostics and imaging devices. I am most recently leading teams developing an automated insulin delivery system used for patients with type 1 and type 2 diabetes. I have a passion for working on products that impact people and have held various roles in areas of human factors and usability, requirements management, and process optimization. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion.
Juan?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Juan Eslava. I'm the head of chief consulting at Werfen, and I've been in the MedTech field for over 23 years now, various roles from engineer to engineering leadership positions, most recently the SVP of Global R&D for Candela Medical, and prior to that, head of the application engineering team at Draeger Medical. I have a deep interest in systems and design thinking and how those can be leveraged to drive innovation.
Wonderful. Jay?
Hey, everybody. My name's Jay McGaffigan. I've been involved in MedTech for going on 20 years, MedTech and health informatics. I'm currently a solutions architect at MedAcuity, and I've been working on systems and devices that span many different fields, from cardiovascular through diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and things like audiology. And through that space, I've worked on many different technologies, all the way from embedded into the cloud. I've helped customers apply latest technologies to their products. And most recently, I've been involved also in some cybersecurity work, helping companies understand the landscape of FDA regulations and how to apply them to their products and processes within their companies.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And now we're going to touch on 4 different topics today. But before we get into those topics, to level set the field for the discussion, I'd like us to have the panelists talk about the 3 different types of innovation: new product innovation, sustaining innovation, and legacy product obsolescence. So Juan, could you please share some thoughts on new product innovation?
Sure. It's a great question, Don. You and I have talked on this previously. I see innovation as a continuum throughout the lifespan of whether it's a product, an idea, and new product innovation. For me, is somewhat of a redundancy in that innovation already has the word novelty contained within it. I like to think of, in terms of analogies, if you have a bushel of apples, for example, new products could be things that you do with those apples that you haven't done before, that leverage new capabilities, new processes. They can also be new products altogether that are more radically different than that bushel of apples, so to speak. And so there too, there's a nuance, Don. There's a continuum of new products, but in summary, I would say they're products that have not been delivered in the past.
Thank you. Eftal, your thoughts on sustaining innovation?
So how can we ensure that we are sustaining innovation? Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So how can we ensure that we are sustaining innovation? So from my experience, really, there's three main things that play an important role in sustaining innovation. One is customer centricity. So making sure that we're focused on the customer and on the user, process optimization, and culture. So making decisions with customers in mind is key to continuously refine a product, especially when adding new features or capabilities, including optimizing maybe the size of the product, scaling the product for growth. So those are important things to keep in mind, but definitely making sure that we are optimizing our process to embed that feedback within the development lifecycle. And so that plays a role in continuously learning and improving a product. Also, culture is really important in terms of sustaining innovation because one, we need to make sure that we're providing people with the opportunity to develop new ideas and to make the product even better, and invest in continuously maintaining that competitive advantage when it comes to sustaining innovation.
Good. And Jay, your thoughts on obsolescence of legacy products?
So yeah, obsolescence isn't really a binary value. When we look at medical devices that are in existence today and coming out today, they're often composed of many components, software subsystems, hardware subsystems, and you have to look at the product as what parts may or may not be facing obsolescence, and how do we, as a corporation, attack that obsolescence. If you can do that, you can take a step back and really determine what your foundation is for your product. Do you have a platform to innovate upon, or do you have to do a do-over, right? Do you have to start over from scratch? So really understanding what legacy means and how your product can go into obsolescence is key to an aspect of your company and corporate innovation.
Wonderful. So with those three different types of innovation in mind, let's begin our conversation on the first of four topics, which is how do you drive effective innovation? And here we're going to take an outside-in lens and discuss how you've seen companies best identify and gain organizational consensus on what unmet needs, customer needs are that will drive those innovation efforts. Juan, do you want to start?
Sure, Don. I think looking from the outside in, you first have to start with defining who you are as a company, defining what your products, your services are, but really to deliver on what is a promise to customers of solving problems or providing much needed services. You have to look at how you go about doing this. I would say the more consistent deliverers of value know how to capture value and deliver effectively through both process and then culture. I think of specifically lifecycle management, managing the process end to end, taking ideas through development and then delivering them as packaged products as being critical. In terms of organizationally, how you build that into your DNA, I think it takes process, and there's a discipline or a rigor that's required. So you look at establishing boards, establishing cross-functional teams that bring diverse opinions, but they also bring diverse understanding of the products that they are helping to deliver to customers. And so from a composition standpoint, I've seen triads or guidance boards that have a minimum representation. I would say that's the voice of customer through marketing, the voice of engineering and operations through a systems architect or someone in the technical space, and then the business voice, which is typically reserved to program management, who manages delivery in terms of efficiency and cost.
Eftal, your thoughts?
I totally agree, Juan. I think in addition to that, I've seen that this has been most effective when people are collecting that data from the field and they consider all aspects of innovation, including the users that they're going to be marketing their product to. So some of that diversity includes like diversity in terms of geographies, experience levels, the context of the users, and insights that can be shared with cross-functional teams. And so gathering that data and having a process to embed that data is basically will increase the confidence of the team, and it will help everyone feel like, we're making informed decisions versus having subjective decisions. And so the data will speak for itself. And, solidifying the process will also increase the likelihood of people trusting the informed decisions that we're making through data.
Wonderful. Jay.
Yeah, I think Juan and Eftal really, nailed this on the head. When I've seen companies, follow the approaches that they outlined, the triad, ensuring that you're including the voice of the customer as well as the engineering representation. You're building a culture of excitement where, everybody feels included, and you're starting to unlock, your innovation. But getting those key metrics from voice of the customer, human factors, aligning those to feed into your process is really important as well.
Good.
Don, if I may, just to follow up, back to the apples analogy. If you run a farm, it's about understanding how the farm operates. What are your leverageable resources? How do you deploy those resources? And in the end, describing the essence of what the farm delivers. So you can draw many analogies, but it really is quite simple before it gets complicated.
Mm-hmm. Good. So let's look at it from the other lens of saying, in your experience, what pitfalls have you observed in these innovation efforts that companies may encounter, and how has that challenged the ability to deliver innovation outcomes? Jay?
Yeah, it's a great question. I remember a project I was working on where we were taking a legacy system that had not really been worked on for a good period of time, and the company was really starting to invest in improving the culture and getting voice of the customer and building a new interface and allowing the evolution of this legacy product, but still providing the same therapy. Throughout this process, we built a brand new version of the product. But one of the things that got missed was sort of the key opinion leaders that were using the legacy product. Some of their needs weren't taken forward. And that really caused the first introduction of this new version to be received with some mixed messaging. There was some positive and there was some negative. But through through the building of this corporate culture that we talk about, we're able to prioritize these missing features and really try to make sure that the key opinion leaders' needs were brought forward.
Good. Eftal, your thoughts on some of these pitfalls?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I totally agree with Jay. I have seen that myself. And I think what's really important is for people to take a step back and take a holistic approach. And so understanding the composition of also the KOLs, considering all the diversity that users have, including, less experienced as well as most experienced users, because they're both going to drive that adoption. And so focusing on one while overseeing the other may result in a missed opportunity, and it can be a very expensive learning curve, forcing the team to really go back to that drawing board. And so this is especially true when it comes to medical devices. There's lots of great insights that quickly, people dive into a solution rather than taking a step back and understanding the opportunity or the problem we're trying to solve, and then developing solutions that are all inclusive of the diverse user base.
Juan?
I smiled, Don, because I don't think there's a single pitfall. There's a group of pitfalls that one should avoid. But to try to narrow it down and maybe boil out the top hitters, I would say it's not involving the customer early on and being proactive in how you deliver value. And so that means bringing customers in, working very closely with customers on the testing front, on usability, on market segment analysis, but also intimately connecting with them by deploying engineers. I've seen in many examples where products are developed and you're optimizing processes, and the triad or the PLM boards that I mentioned forget to fill that empty seat, which is supposed to be the voice of customer. And in that, companies lose the essence of what their purpose is. And so I'd say that would be the biggest one. From a capability standpoint, it's not focusing on your core. So there's an element of understanding how you deliver and really leveraging those skills. Back to the farm analogy, if you have an orchard, you better know how to harvest apples.
Very good. So I think one of the takeaways here is that each of you has talked about the importance of culture. And so let's turn our attention to a second topic, which is how does a company's culture impact innovation? And now we're going to take what's effectively an inside-out lens and talk about how you've seen companies value learning and adaptation, and maybe you can offer some practical thoughts about how to build and live that culture. Eftal?
Sure. So to me, this is one of the most important aspects of promoting innovation, in my opinion. I think that, companies that have been most innovative that I have personally worked with were very conscious to create a culture that organically cultivated innovation. These cultures were basically judge-free environments. There was no idea that was too outrageous to be shared, and prototyping and having time to prototype was part of the learning experience. And so a percentage of time was allocated to engineers and to the teams to network and try out new things and tap into, engineers' intrinsic drive to innovate. And also, I've seen companies really, do that, but I think following through is incredibly important. So having the support from the leadership team to see that the innovation is funded, is resourced, and then it's also a part of the product that's deployed to users. I think that really motivates people, and it creates a culture of innovation.
Very good. Jay, would you like to add some thoughts on that?
Sure. Building a culture of inclusive learning, Eftal mentioned learning as well, I find is an accelerator. And what do I mean by inclusive learning? I think there's different aspects to it. When you're dealing with like legacy products and maybe new product innovation, there's the potential for having these siloed teams, meaning, the team responsible for the legacy product doesn't get to work on the new, cool, fun stuff. But when you break down those barriers, especially along the lens of learning, you're really populating both teams with the powers to bring innovation to their respective product and to cross-pollinate. I've been a part of many teams where I've come in to help do that inclusive learning. I bring technology experience from other products. I come into a company where, we sit down and we talk about the technologies that we're going to apply to maybe a next generation or a product update. And we just ensure that there's cross-pollination there. And it really does help build that inside-out culture.
Good. And Juan?
Yeah, sure. To build on learning, I think learning is critical, but how you learn matters greatly. And so there needs to be discipline in learning. You hire the best, you have the right conversations, you provide safe environments to ask the right questions so the learnings can be deployed across the entirety of the organization. It's a balancing act. It's not simply the fun stuff on learning, but how you apply it. And as a systems and design thinking advocate, I believe you have to bake, those elements of system thinking and design thinking into your processes to drive discipline and to really bring people together in a common way.
Mm-hmm. I'll just throw in a comment. There was a recent article in the MIT Sloan Management Review on intellectual honesty. And what it talked about was how if the leadership team is visibly and transparent about things, it creates the very culture and behaviors that the three of you have just articulated. And, I would commend that kind of thinking as additive to what you've said.
And Don, for folks that are deeply concerned with establishing requirements and specifications, it's providing that safe environment to be able to say, I don't know, and to dig several layers deeper than the requirement itself. That works incredibly effectively.
It's fascinating when you see that kind of interaction, and then it creates that kind of safety to be able to then for other people to throw stuff out. So let's talk now about a third topic, which is organizational capabilities that can drive a competitive advantage. So what are some of the examples of how you've seen companies build differentiated organizational capabilities? And those can cover a whole range of possibilities: scale, learning curve, talent development, data, customer habits. We could go on and discuss a number of them. But how have those kind of capabilities been built in your organization such that you develop that kind of competitive advantage vis-a-vis the marketplace? Juan?
Sure. So as you know, and for the folks that may know a little bit of my history, I've been involved in R&D transformations. And in participating and helping to drive organizational restructuring, something I've found that's been very common is how you're harmonizing processes, streamlining tools. There's a focus on the leaning out of processes. But really, the aim is to derive 1 + 1 is 3 value, right? And so it's important to put in the leadership structure of promotion of concepts that bring in new blood, new ideas, new ways of thinking to progress what is normal today, but also operating in some future to define what the normal is tomorrow, and being highly adaptable. Back to the PLM boards, the cross-functional teams, it's consistency there. I've seen new ways of developing products that are rooted in systems, and that's certainly a hot topic now because of the need to manage interdependencies, relationships at an ecosystem level. And for that reason, I'm an incredible advocate of building system engineering prowess within the company and systems thinking more broadly, because it's not just an engineering discussion.
Mm-hmm. Efdal.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I'm personally a huge champion of agile and safe frameworks, and so bringing cross-functional teams together and collaborating as Scrum teams or agile release trains through the regular structured cadence, it certainly drives discipline, and it optimizes the execution of programs, really giving the organization a competitive advantage. And so I have seen over the years throughout my career, medical devices make their way from waterfall to agile to safe, but there's still opportunity for sure for improvement, and it's still being adopted, I think, slowly but surely, but a lot faster than what I've seen at the beginning of my career. So I think that's great. I definitely highly encourage organizations to make this leap, as these frameworks have been proven to be very effective. And so the more we leverage from other people's experience, I think that the better we will be in terms of really creating a good, solid process and framework within the organization.
Good. Jay?
Yeah, if I could add on to what you were saying, Efdal, I think in addition to that discipline that you see these agile frameworks bring to bear, you also see an uptick in team excitement and ownership, right? So when the engineers and the testers and the people implementing the product feel safe and feel empowered to talk to across the organization to the key stakeholders, I think you see that the stigma of I'm working on a legacy product goes away and I'm just punching the clock disappears. You see people starting to ask interesting questions, offer interesting ideas. And I've helped companies, I've been a part of that with multiple companies, as they've gone through that transformation. And it does lead to an immense positivity that, people go back to saying, I love what I'm doing. I'm working on a medical device. I'm helping save lives. I'm not just, fixing a bug. There's that level of ownership is just super cool.
Absolutely.
So what I want to encourage folks in the audience is please feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen so that we can address your thoughts as we get toward the end. Let's move to our fourth topic on product lifecycle management. What product lifecycle investment decisions have you seen companies do relative to the three different types of innovation, and how do those strike a balance between new products sustaining and legacy obsolescence and sunsetting those existing products? And conversely, let's also address what have you seen go wrong? So how do you do product lifecycle investment decisions right? And what can go wrong that people need to be aware of so they don't repeat some of bad outcomes? Eftal?
Sure. So I've seen, definitely investing. I think we've talked about this quite a bit in user research, in developing a plan, right, to incorporate the feedback that we receive from the field. And so making sure that that's embedded as part of the development process is really key to supporting a balance for existing technology, as well as learning and sustaining innovation. I think the biggest danger in terms of imbalance is a lack of prioritization and management of team workload. And so being very optimistic about how fast you can scale is I think a lot of companies may go through that challenge. But it's important to retain talent and invest in people's growth within a company. And so it's really important to be realistic on how quickly an organization can scale and managing that workload, as well as prioritizing. And so you have lots of ambitious goals, but what we need to do is make sure that we're targeting the most important goals and that we're managing the team's workload to retain talent. Good.
And Jay?
Yeah, in addition to what you're talking about, Eftal, I think, and I'm going to take a little bit of a legacy product focus to my answer. Ensuring that the teams working on these products feel part of the process and that organizational uptick that we've been talking about is really important. I think you don't want your teams to feel stuck. I've mentioned this before in some of my other answers, but other parts of the conversation. You want to make sure that people don't feel stuck on the legacy products. They want to know that the company is invested in that product. Because as we know, legacy doesn't always mean it's not being sold anymore, right? It doesn't have a useful lifespan anymore. And in fact, it's still maybe making the company, lots of money. So we've got to keep an eye on that level of training and knowledge sharing, making sure that those products feel part of the portfolio, those product teams, I should say. Conversely, in a negative sense, when you see companies not really planning for the lifespan or the legacy aspects of their product, maybe it's withering on the vine, that there's obsolescence coming, maybe a chipset is going out of date or an operating system is going out of date. And there's just not like a venue to bring those up. It's almost like your product can hit a cliff if you're not careful, right? And then it all of a sudden becomes hard to maintain and innovate on. And that leads to team, frustration and lower morale.
One.
Right. Don, we started by defining innovation and we talked about life cycle management. For folks that are taking notes, if you drew a line on the left-hand side, you have the past. There's a reality on the architectures, the products that are in the market that were devised with scope that is past relative. And so it's important to understand that context before one moves on along the continuum and looks at the present and the future being more exploratory in nature. And the companies that do invest in R&D and capabilities do a really good job of defining what is a past context, a current context, and then also invest in the future context where it's fuzzier, there's more exploration. Where companies perhaps don't do well, I would say, is when they rely on gut feeling or intuition. They don't collect data on architectural impacts from technology shifts, as an example. Companies that are highly siloed and don't encourage discussions and don't learn as a result, they tend to fail when it comes to managing the life cycle of products and ideas. I would say in that sense, you need to maintain a bucket of investments supporting those money generators, the products that have been released and keep the lights on, versus those more disruptive ideas that may protect you when the future shifts and moves in a different direction.
Very good. So we have a number of questions from the audience. The first one from Frederick really goes back to a point that a number of you were making here between exploration for new products and exploitation of existing products on the market. And he asks, how do you manage the mix of managing legacy aspects and innovating at the same time versus people engagement? I mean, from a people perspective, how do you avoid, quote, the guys maintaining the old and current technology versus the pioneers? And he says, I agree, legacy doesn't mean obsolete, but it often feels that way and feeds the company. So let's talk about guys maintaining the old tech, the pioneers, and how do you not have the really, well, we're stuck on the stuff that's going away versus, we're out there inventing the future and not creating an imbalance. So who wants to go first?
I can start, I guess. So from my perspective, the legacy products have interesting requirements and interesting features that if you're building a new version of the product or an expanded new version of the product, that's one thing. If you're completely innovating on another new product, you're still likely in the same space. And so you don't want to lose the knowledge that's in your legacy team. You want to make them feel part of the future through the culture that we've been talking about. I worked on a product that had been kind of siloed for a long time. The team had been drastically reduced. There were only a couple of key stakeholders that understood the product, the engineers. And when the company that I was working with took them and said, you need to be helping us understand the future product and helping us implement it or bringing expertise, they were happy to continue to manage aspects of the legacy product because they were seeing where the future was going. So corporations that can think in that manner and unlock those silos is where I think you're going to see some success.
Jay, I'd like to add to that. There's context matters and flight levels matter as well. The conversations that companies are having on value vary depending on and I don't know what position this individual holds, but if you're managing at the portfolio level, you have to think about things differently than if you're managing at the feature level. And prioritization, to Efdal's point earlier, will change. You operate in a future sense if you're looking at portfolio shifts that may be disrupted by new technologies. And so there you're having a conversation on, are you investing in new core capabilities? Are you bringing in partnerships with folks that offer new skills that you may not possess? And then on the existing product side, you're looking at component innovation, how you're incrementally either adding to bottom line performance in the business and making processes more efficient, maybe considering new manufacturing partnerships, global supply chain disruption reactions. These need to sustain the business because at the end of the day, those are the projects that help fuel those more exploratory projects. And so I wish I could say that there's a mix of 70, 20, 10%. There's no such thing. But it starts looking like that when you deploy it. You have to build consensus that you're always adding value, whether it's incremental or disruptive value.
Yep. And I totally agree with both of you. And I think, just looking at this from the question with respect to the people aspect of things, of, people who may be resistant to change. I know I have experienced that quite a bit. And I think, it's important to know that it's not a binary thing. So it won't happen overnight, that's for sure. So you have your adoption curve where it'll take time to get people to see things from a different perspective, to get people to get on board with, transforming or moving towards, new ideas, new ways of doing things. And so really getting allies, I think, internally and making sure that, you have space to prove, right, what it is that you wanted to convey or transform. That's key, but also it really takes a lot of perseverance because yes, that does happen quite a bit where people will resist and they just want to maintain what's old and what's current versus, you know, looking at things from a different lens. But I definitely feel that that takes some time and perseverance, but it's definitely doable, and it's great when everyone gets on board and you get over your adoption curve.
There is, I'll offer an added thought. There is the organizations that best handle the people side accept the premise that good people want to make a difference every day, and they go out of their way to make sure those people can do that. And so when you walk around and talk to people at all levels, and this can be folks working on the old tech, current tech, or the pioneer activities that Frederick mentioned, and
Right.
you begin to share ideas like, you know, what are you seeing? What are you learning? What are the pieces of knowledge that you have? And I'm always amazed, delighted and amazed that, you know, those good people want to make a difference every day, and they see things that others may not see. And so when we're talking about all of the ideas you folks have mentioned, we're really talking about how do you integrate those tidbits of knowledge that are dispersed throughout the organization.
Well said,
Absolutely.
Don. If I could just add one more little bit, you know, as MediCuity, we're a consulting company, so oftentimes we bring newer experiences to a company. And I find that some of the most successful projects I've ever worked on have been integrated, where we get to talk to and work side by side with the company's employees. We're not replacing them when we come in. In fact, we want to train them. And, you know, the highest successes have been when a company, as Swan was saying, you know, they look at bringing in outside knowledge when needed, but it's not to replace, it's to enhance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know, those internal processes open up that ability to enhance. So I think that's where a well-functioning organization really helps support their people who want to do good.
So Jay, I can endorse MediCuity's capabilities in that space, having experienced them directly. But Juan and Eftal, perhaps you can talk about what Jay just said, which is, you know, how have you seen outside organizations galvanize the kind of change that we're talking about here?
I
I'll
definitely
start. Sorry, Abdel.
go ahead.
I've seen, if I understood the question correctly, it's around how external skill sets are deployed and how they benefit internal teams, or the mix. And what I've seen is, by curating and really developing strong partnerships where you bring new skill sets that you perhaps don't possess internally, or you need to augment because of scale, they've really come in to help provide slack within the organization, so you're concentrating and really focusing on what matters. There's the death by priority one. Everything is priority one, and there are log jams that organizations have a tough time getting out of. That's where bringing external capabilities to augment teams can be incredibly helpful. And it gets to one of the other questions on prioritization. You have to look at how you deploy your internal resources to develop skills that ultimately become valuable capabilities for the organization. So it's a mix, but it's certainly a conversation that needs to be had always proactively.
Good. Eftal?
Yeah, and I think your question was right around galvanizing, right, the teams and supporting the teams in terms of creating that that space, right, where people are learning. And so it all comes back to culture, comes back to how are we like learning from each other? How are we absorbing the information that we're learning from each other? Do we have a one team mindset? Are we open to change? So those are all things that I think the company as a whole really defines that in its identity. and in its culture. So if that's blocked, so let's say you can have the best idea, and if it's consistently blocked, and then you don't have more ideas being funneled through a channel, then I think that's a lost opportunity for companies, and it definitely will affect innovation as a whole and transformations in general.
Very good. So we have a related question from John. Efdal mentioned the importance of program prioritization for resource allocation and balance. Can you share any best practices or key process steps to help ensure this gets addressed?
Sure. So I had mentioned that I am a big fan of SAFE, and so I do champion that framework. I think that taking a really transparent and authentic look at how you're performing as an organization, understanding, looking back at your year, how have we performed? If we didn't meet the vast majority of our goals, why is that, right? Deciphering, like, why is it? Is it a matter of, right, do we have the right talent? Are we actually prioritizing our work? Did we get work that we probably didn't anticipate? And so evaluating our goals and our year prior, I think, is really important to look at that with a very honest lens. And the SAFE framework really provides an opportunity to be doing that evaluation on a quarterly basis. And so prioritizing work and understanding if there needs to be a pivot, then that would be an opportunity to be doing that every quarter. And so the SAFE framework does provide that. And also SAFE also provides an opportunity for a bottoms up view of how things are looking. So traditionally, you'd have all of your tasks that are mapped out, and then you have a timeline, and oftentimes you'll have people miss that timeline. And so in order for us to really look at things from both perspectives, so have a bottoms up approach, allowing teams to really have time to plan out their quarter and what needs to be done to get goals met, and then also having a top-down approach where you're looking at, well, what is really something that I have learned in the field that I may need to pivot, or how have I prioritized in a way that I am creating this space for the teams to be successful. So I think it's really important for us to make sure that we're managing these things both from a bottoms up and a top down approach, so that we set the teams up for success.
Right, Don, I think how you go about doing that is important. I would say to John, meet often to discuss the pace of value creation. Are features being developed in a timely fashion? Are they adding value? How do they compare against other features that need to be developed? And the same applies at the product level. Are we advancing a product that is valuable to the portfolio? And does it come before a sustaining issue? Post-COVID, we all learned that the business needed to put certain priorities aside because supply chains were disrupted, and you needed to move resources and prioritize obsolescence issues or manufacturing line down situations. And so it's important to realize that sometimes, it's still work and you still have to prioritize based on the business. How one communicates is important. So maintain dashboards, maintain visibility on program and project progress, communicate often, and invite the right people to understand how progress is being measured. Back to the boards and the cross-functional teams, have discussions at varying levels and show the metrics, have folks feel like they have skin in the game and can influence outcomes. And so to really come back full circle, it's a culture of information, of learning, and transparency.
Fabulous. So John asked a follow-on question, which is, he's not familiar with the SAFE framework. Perhaps you can describe it in some greater detail, and how does it get brought into an organization when it's done right?
Sure. So I'm happy to share that. So SAFE is basically an acronym for Scaled Agile Framework. And if any of you are familiar with Agile as a software development methodology, it basically provides a set of roles, responsibilities, meetings, and it really brings together developers and testers to be coordinating. And so oftentimes I've also seen with medical devices that quality would be included as a Scrum team. So it's bringing together a cross-functional team as a unit with a Scrum Master who would be overseeing that work, and then really providing development and test to be in sync with each other, so that we don't have this waterfall case where you would develop, you test, you're not sure what you developed, and so that cycle becomes not integrated well. And so at a team level, you have Scrum and Agile, but SAFe is really this a strategic layer that's been added to Agile, where you're evaluating what needs to be done on a quarterly basis. And so you're dividing your year into a 3-month time frame. So your sprints are 2 weeks, typically 2 to 4 weeks. And then you have a quarter, which would be around 6 sprints, so around 12 weeks. And so that quarter, you have a series of meetings that usually span around a week, maybe less, where the business will provide goals and objectives that would be outlined. And then the teams go off to really figure out what work needs to be done, and then bring it together to really map that work to the goals. And so they'd be able to commit to, so let's say you have 10 goals, they'd be able to communicate that based on the work that we've identified, we can commit to 8 out of the 10 or maybe less. And so that helps the business then understand, what can be achieved, and then map out their overall program for the year, or, however long it is, to see whether or not you're still on track, or if you need to pivot and prioritize. So there's a lot of references with respect to SAFe. I definitely encourage, looking that up, and most companies are adopting that. And personally, I am working with it currently within my company. It's really effective, and the better you manage that synchronization of cross-functional teams to no longer be siloed, the better it's going to be for your organization. Better quality, better process, and better integration of that feedback that you're getting from the field.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Eftal. Having worked on products where Agile was just being introduced, there was always this kind of missing component that fed into the corporate level, where I see SAFe. Once I started using that, you could see the ability to prioritize, for example, to answer one of the questions, becomes corporate level, but also the teams feel like they're contributing the information to help do the best prioritization possible. And SAFe really just does tie together some loose ends that you don't often get when you're just starting in your Agile journey. So I find it to be really powerful.
Exactly. I think that piece was definitely missing with Agile, because basically with medical devices, you do have to have a plan. And it's not just it's not just getting feedback and going through the loop. So you do have to be very strategic about your development.
And I believe it's really complementary to this idea of incorporating systems and design thinking. You're iterating and you're having conversations and informing what your product's needs are with customer in mind. And so I think it's very powerful.
Mm. So I'll throw in an anecdote that supports everything the three of you have just been saying from my own experience. So I've been a CEO 6 times. And one of the things that I always did is I wandered the halls and I asked people. So taking the SAFe framework, taking some of the Agile stuff that's been defined, and I just go ask people, how's it going? Anything blocking your way? And all the rest. And so then, from an organizational behavior culture standpoint, the word starts to spread. Oh, he wants to know how it's going. Yeah, well, he asked me too. Well, then that starts to percolate up. And then I go ask the VPs, hey, this is what I'm hearing from one of your areas. Like, tell me what's going on. So they get pressure and some cultural focus on, they should be wandering around and asking those questions, because then those VPs are charged with making sure that the blocking points, they're inhibiting the frameworks from being successfully lived, are cleared up.
Right. I mean, I really gave a very summarized version of what SAFe is. There's lots of tools within the framework that help provide that transparency. And so you have a confidence vote from the team, so the team will clearly express how confident they are in terms of the objectives that they're committing to. There's an inspect and adapt, right, of where you're looking at the entire quarter, and then you're inspecting and adapting and learning from that quarter to see what can you be doing differently to better perform in the next quarter. You have your retrospectives where you're analyzing like the ceremonies itself, like within that week. So there's lots of tools within that framework that really help provide that transparency in a way that you would get that information across the board for all of the teams. And so, I'm just trying to summarize it very quickly here, but I definitely feel like there's a lot to learn in terms of this framework. And I personally have, seen a tremendous amount of advantage personally in terms of having that. And I'm hoping that more medical devices will adopt it fully. And like Jay said, Agile doesn't really cut it. You really need a strategic layer, which SAFE provides.
This has been wonderful. So let's take a different angle with yet another question and say, when should an organization decide to obsolete a system? Who wants to go first?
Don, it's not an easy question to answer. As luck would have it, this week I've been at the Harvard Business School discussing innovation, and this came up at least 3 times. And as you know, looking at case studies, there are examples of when obsolescence management would have been critical and tough decisions on when to end the life of a product needed to be had, but they weren't. It goes back to this process of sharing information and having awareness from your markets to your operations. There's no aha moment that, or even a single answer that suggests it's June 2nd. That's when we will obsolete the product. It's more of managing that life cycle as a continuum. Well, when does it make sense? When are we straining our capabilities, and when are we losing our shirts from a value capture perspective? Maybe it's time to start thinking about either extending the product with new hooks, new features, or start obsoleting the product. So it largely varies, but it is highly reliant on how one has your sensor network, probing customer needs, technology, etc.
Also, in addition to that, understanding what your product is, how it's architected, how it's comprised, right? Is it a legacy monolithic system that's going to prevent change or make change very costly? Being able to communicate what you have and how you could evolve it is going to be an important input into what Juan and you're talking about, I think. I've worked on systems that have been very monolithic in nature, and to make changes was very hard. But as you build more modular systems and think about the architecture, or if you have the option of taking your legacy monolithic system and breaking it into modular components, you're helping your company you're helping your company think about obsolescence in a different way, maybe extending the life of the product. You're giving levers to your senior management, something to keep in mind.
Jay and Eftal, I'm a systems mechanical person, so I consider myself more of a nuts and bolts guy, but I see architectural disruption as being critical in that decision-making process. I'm curious, from your lens, how does one evaluate when a software platform or an architecture needs to be obsoleted? I think that's a very tough question for organizations, and they have a tough time dealing with them. That's where, as you know, with MedAcuity, we've brought experts that help us evaluate architectural resilience and help make that connection. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You go, Eftal.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that from a software perspective, there's different lenses you can look at it through. What do we have? Maybe we bought this product, and certain dependencies, like, is it running on a Windows operating system? What's the long-term support of that? And if it's coming to an end, what are we going to do? The more information that you're able to talk about in the context of your software and its supportability, I think gives you the ability to decide or to help plan for obsolescence, right? But if you have a product and you're not really investing in it, you lose the ability to see when that wall is going to come hit you until potentially it's too late. And in today's climate of cybersecurity,
Right.
it's a lot harder to set it and forget it, right? To just have a product and say it works perfectly and I'm not going to monitor it and understand what could change. So building the capabilities internally to understand what you have, be able to assess it, tracking, your bill of materials and things like that is going to help you plan your software obsolescence. Eftal?
Yeah, I totally agree. I was going to mention, outdated technology that would pose security risks. That's definitely a huge factor. But also, right, how can we scale? How can we scale software? I think sometimes people don't really think about, right, modularization of components within software. And so that really becomes very laborious to really maintain. And so having things that are very highly customized, or, if you don't have sufficient documentation, or you haven't retained the people who have the knowledge for this highly customized software. So it's a lot more effort to maintain that. And so that's, those are among the things to consider when looking at obsolescence of, especially software and recreating something.
Good. Well,
And Don, just to close, I asked about this from a software perspective because often that change in functionality helps drive hardware obsolescence. PCBAs or certain more infrastructural elements have to be updated. So to bring the systems into it, they go hand in hand.
good.
Agreed.
So I want to first thank our panelists here for a lively conversation. We've got 2 minutes or so left before the hour is up. So let's wrap up by doing quick key takeaways. How about each of you throw something out to as parting thoughts for our audience?
Eftal, and maybe in the same order.
I could go first. So I think that, it's really important to, one, articulate a vision that inspires people if we want to innovate. And just to recap, really creating a culture that promotes that curiosity and learning that we discussed. And absolutely, it's important to be hiring your best talent and empowering them to tap into their intrinsic drive. But equally important is to be mindful to retain them and to manage a healthy balance and have an equilibrium within your organization. So that's kind of a key takeaway.
Okay. Who goes next?
I'll add to that a little bit. Understanding what legacy means to your corporation or to your company is important as well, right? How are you going to manage your legacy products with this, culture that you're trying to build? Make sure it's included. Make sure that your teams there feel empowered to keep obsolescence at bay, right? The longer you can keep obsolescence at bay, the better for your products.
One.
I couldn't agree more. Treat your products, your business models, and your processes as systems. All constantly evolve those systems and build adaptability. That comes through empowerment of people. So I agree with all panelists. But my last pitch is try building in a systems or ecosystems perspective into the day-to-day.
Wonderful. And I'll throw in one parting thought before we hand it back to Nicole. Keep working to uncover unmet customer needs, and do that by always and repeatedly asking, what problems are we solving for whom? So thank you to the audience. Thank you to the panelists. And Nicole, back to you.
All right. Well, great conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I hope everyone on the webinar enjoyed it. As mentioned, you will get a copy of the recording after. We hope that you share it. Thank you again to MedAcuity for hosting today's conversation. And I encourage you to go to massmedic.com/events and look at all the other great events we have coming up. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.